A year-old boy points at police officer in court. The reason stuns the jury. The Municipal Court of Fairview was in complete silence when 72-year-old Mrs. Dorothy Wilson sat in the defendant's chair with trembling hands. Beside her, her 6-year-old grandson Michael watched everything with attentive eyes, while nervously swinging his little legs that barely touched the floor. It was then that little Michael, who had been quiet next to his grandmother, suddenly stood up from his chair. With his index finger outstretched, he pointed at Police Officer Sergeant Robert Johnson, who was standing in the right corner of the room. "That's the man who helped Grandma," the boy exclaimed in a clear, firm voice, causing an immediate stir among those present. Judge Thomas Wells banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order in the courtroom, while DA George Sullivan stood up indignantly. "This is outrageous," protested the DA, adjusting his tie. "The child shouldn't be present in this hearing. I request he be removed immediately." Mrs. Dorothy grabbed her grandson's hand, trying to make him sit down. "Michael!" "No, sweetheart, be still," she whispered, visibly distressed. But the boy, with the determination typical of someone who doesn't yet understand the weight of social hierarchies, remained standing, his gaze fixed on the officer, who now looked extremely uncomfortable. Uncle Robert came to the garden every Sunday. He brought the tomato seeds, Michael continued, his childlike voice echoing through the courtroom, and he also helped Grandma build the pretty scarecrow. Sergeant Robert, who moments earlier had testified claiming he didn't know. Mrs. Dorothy, let alone her initiative, visibly paled. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, as the judge watched him with renewed interest. "Sergeant Johnson, would you like to clarify this situation?" asked the judge, leaning forward in his chair. Defense attorney David Mitchell, who until then had seemed hopeless about the case, quickly stood up. "Your Honor, I request permission for minor Michael Wilson to be formally heard. He appears to have crucial information for this case." "This is irregular," protested the DA again. "A 6-year-old child doesn't have the judgment to—" "On the contrary, Mr. Sullivan," interrupted the judge, adjusting his glasses. "Children, this age often have sharp, unfiltered perception. Let's hear what the little one has to say." Mrs. Dorothy tried to hold back her tears. At 72, she never imagined she'd be in court accused of trespassing and disturbing public order. All she had done was turn an abandoned, trash-filled lot in Hope Village, on the outskirts of Fairview, into a community garden that fed dozens of needy families. Now, her freedom, and more importantly, custody of her grandson Michael, was at stake. The judge asked Michael to come forward. A social worker assisting with the case helped the boy sit in a special chair adjusted to his height. The little one, with his neatly cut brown hair and a simple green t-shirt, looked frighteningly small in the massive courtroom. "Michael, do you know what it means to tell the truth?" the judge asked gently. "Yes, sir. My grandma says lying is ugly and makes Jesus sad," the boy replied naturally, drawing a few quiet smiles from the audience. "Very well. Can you tell us how you know Sergeant Robert?" Michael adjusted himself in the chair and began speaking with surprising clarity. "He started coming to our garden after he told Grandma to stop planting. But then one day he saw we gave food to people who don't have money, and also to his little girl when she was sick." A murmur spread through the courtroom, and Sergeant Robert briefly closed his eyes, as if absorbing a blow. "Is the sergeant's daughter sick?" asked the defense attorney. "Yes, she has a hard-to-say name for her illness. Grandma used to make her a special vegetable soup to help her get strong," explained Michael. "Uncle Robert cried one day when he thanked Grandma." The entire courtroom turned its attention to the officer, who now seemed completely disarmed. "Sergeant Johnson, would you like to speak?" asked the judge, his tone mixing authority and compassion. The officer hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. "Your Honor, His voice faltered. He took a deep breath before continuing. "Yes, my daughter Emily has leukemia. She's been in treatment for 8 months. And do you know the defendant, Mrs. Dorothy Wilson?" "Yes, sir," he finally admitted. "At first I went there to notify her about the illegal occupation of the land, following orders from above. But, the judge encouraged. But when I saw the work she was doing, how that abandoned lot had been transformed, how the people in the community were benefiting," he paused, visibly emotional, And yes, the organic vegetables from the garden have helped a lot with my daughter's meals during her treatment. The courtroom was now completely silent. Mrs. Dorothy looked at the officer with a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Why did you lie in your previous testimony, Sergeant?" the judge asked, his tone stern again. The officer glanced briefly at the courtroom door, then at the floor. "I received direct orders from Dr. Charles Morrison, the city's Department of Public Works secretary. The bad man who yelled at Grandma," Michael interrupted, standing up again. "He said he'd send Uncle Robert far away if he didn't." "Lie? Michael?" Mrs. Dorothy whispered, horrified by the situation. "The boy is right," Sergeant Robert confirmed with a heavy sigh. "Dr. Charles threatened to transfer me to a station 300 kilometers away. I can't be away from my daughter during her treatment. I had no choice." "We always have choices, Sergeant," the judge replied, "and you just made one by telling the truth." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, the defense attorney, sensing a crucial opening, stepped forward. "Your Honor, I'd like to draw attention to the fact that the lot in question, located in Hope Village, has been abandoned for over 15 years. According to documentation I intend to present, the land belongs to the city and was originally meant for a community center, a project that never materialized." The judge made a note and nodded. "Proceed, Attorney David. Furthermore, I request that Mr. Charles Morrison, the Department of Public Works Secretary, be called to testify regarding his personal interest in this case, as well as the alleged threats against Sergeant Robert Johnson." Michael, from his special chair, fidgeted and raised his hand like he did in school. The social worker smiled and signaled to the judge, who allowed the boy to speak. "I have pictures of Uncle Robert in the garden," he said, pulling small pieces of colored paper from his pocket. "Grandma gave me a camera for my birthday." The courtroom reacted with astonishment. The defense attorney quickly requested that the photos be admitted as evidence. The images were somewhat blurry, taken with a cheap disposable camera, but they clearly showed Sergeant Robert helping build garden beds, carrying watering cans, and in one photo, smiling next to Mrs. Dorothy and other community members, all holding freshly harvested vegetables. "I also have one of the bad man," Michael added, showing a photo where part of the face of what appeared to be the Department of Public Works secretary could be seen, watching the garden from a distance with a stern expression. The social worker carefully gathered the photographs and handed them to the judge, who examined them closely before passing them to the prosecutor. DA George Sullivan, after reviewing the images, seemed momentarily unsettled. "I request a recess, Your Honor," the prosecutor asked. "New evidence has come to light, and we need to reconsider the district attorney's position in this case." The judge agreed and declared a 2-hour recess. As the courtroom emptied, Mrs. Dorothy Wilson hugged her grandson tightly, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "You're my little hero, you know that," she whispered, smoothing the boy's brown hair. "You always say we should tell the truth, Grandma," he replied simply, wiping her tears with his small hands. In the courthouse hallway, Sergeant Robert Johnson hesitantly approached Mrs. Dorothy and Michael, accompanied by the defense attorney. "Mrs. Wilson, he began, visibly uncomfortable. "There's no need to say anything, Sergeant," Mrs. Dorothy replied with dignity. "I understand the difficult position you're in. How is your little girl?" The officer seemed surprised by the genuine question. "She showed slight improvement last week. The doctors are cautiously optimistic," he answered, his voice thick with emotion. "The vegetables from your garden have been a blessing. The doctors say the healthy diet is making a difference in her treatment." "I'm glad to hear that. When we get back home, I'll set aside those kale and spinach seedlings I promised her," Mrs. Dorothy said, as if she weren't in the middle of a trial that could result in her conviction. Michael stepped closer to the officer and, to everyone's surprise, took his hand. "Uncle Robert, Grandma won't go to jail, right?" he asked, his big brown eyes filled with childish worry. The officer crouched down to the boy's level. "I'll do everything I can to help your grandmother, Michael. I promise." The defense attorney, observing the scene, called Sergeant Robert aside for a private conversation. "Sergeant, I need to know more about these orders from the Department of Public Works. Why such interest in an abandoned lot?" Robert glanced around, making sure no one could hear them. There are rumors that the city plans to sell the land to a developer. A luxury project there would raise property values in the whole area and, well, they say Dr. Charles Morrison's brother is a minority partner in that company. I see, the attorney murmured, jotting down notes. Do you have any proof of this? Not directly, but I know Dr. Charles's secretary, Mrs. Martha Sanders, was very troubled by some documents he had her prepare. She's an honest woman. She might be willing to talk. I'll reach out to her immediately, the attorney said, already hurrying away. Meanwhile, in the judge's private chambers, Judge E. Thomas Wells made a call to the Municipal Oversight Board. The case was taking unexpected turns, and his 3 decades of experience on the bench told him there was much more behind this simple trespassing charge. When the court reconvened 2 hours later, there were a few new faces present. Mrs. Martha Sanders, Dr. Charles's secretary, sat discreetly at the back of the room. Beside her was a woman around 65 years old who introduced herself as Helen Carter, a former employee of the city's Department of Planning. DA George Sullivan spoke up as soon as everyone settled. Your Honor, after reviewing the new evidence and considering Sergeant Robert Johnson's testimony, the District Attorney's Office requests a temporary suspension of these proceedings for a broader investigation into the circumstances surrounding the charges against Mrs. Dorothy Wilson. The judge nodded and looked at the defense attorney. Attorney David Mitchell, would you like to respond? Yes, Your Honor. The defense requests the immediate acquittal of my client, considering the evidence that she has been carrying out work of significant social interest on an abandoned lot that, according to documents I now submit, was originally intended for community purposes. The attorney handed a folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Furthermore, the attorney continued, we have here Mrs. Helen Carter, a former city employee who can confirm that the lot in question was designated in 2005 for the construction of a community center, a project that was never executed due to alleged lack of funding. The judge examined the documents carefully and signaled for the former employee to approach. After taking the oath, Helen clearly recounted how the lot had been part of a social project nearly 2 decades ago. But the project was shelved when the municipal administration changed. That lot became a garbage dump and a drug hotspot for years, Your Honor, she explained. It was a blessing when Mrs. Dorothy started cleaning it up and planting. The whole community benefited. Then, to everyone's surprise, the defense attorney called Mrs. Martha Sanders. The secretary, visibly nervous, confirmed that she had prepared documents for a bid that would favor Morrison Developments, whose minority partner was Frank Morrison, the brother of the Department of Public Works secretary. Dr. Charles made me backdate several documents, Your Honor, she confessed, her voice trembling. I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid of losing my job. I'm a widow, and I support my special needs daughter alone. The courtroom fell completely, silent as the secretary detailed how the Department of Public Works secretary had pressured Sergeant Robert Johnson, threatening to transfer him if he didn't testify against Mrs. Dorothy. And why isn't the secretary present today? The judge questioned. He traveled to Washington, D.C. this morning, Your Honor, the prosecutor informed, supposedly for a meeting at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The judge made a few notes and then looked directly at Mrs. Dorothy. Mrs. Wilson, would you like to speak? The elderly woman rose with difficulty, leaning on the table in front of her. At 72, her body showed the wear of a lifetime of hard work, but her eyes held a striking dignity. Your Honor, I just wanted to do something good for my community. When my son and daughter-in-law died in that accident, leaving my little grandson Michael with me, I realized many children in Hope Village didn't have enough to eat. That lot was full of trash and rats. I started by cleaning a small corner to plant some vegetables for Michael, and little by little others came to help. She paused, taking a deep breath. Now over 30 families get food from the garden, and we even teach the children how to plant and respect nature. I didn't know I was doing anything wrong. If I'd known the lot had an interested owner, I never would have started the garden there. Michael, who had been sitting quietly beside the social worker, suddenly stood up. Grandma's good, Mr. Judge. She gives food to everyone and teaches kids not to fight. Please don't let them take her. The simplicity and sincerity of the child's plea moved everyone in the courtroom. The judge smiled faintly at the boy. "Don't worry, Michael. We're here to find the truth and do what's right." The defense attorney seized the moment for his final appeal. "Your Honor, I request the immediate acquittal of my client on the charges of trespassing and disturbing the peace. Mrs. Dorothy not only restored a degraded public space, but created a project of significant social interest that benefits dozens of vulnerable families. Moreover, as has become evident, there are clear signs of ulterior motives behind the removal of the community garden, which constitutes, at the very least, administrative misconduct by the Department of Public Works." The judge listened attentively and, after consulting his notes, addressed the DA. "Mr. Sullivan, does the District Attorney's Office maintain its request to suspend the proceedings?" "Yes, Your Honor. And I'll add that the DA's office will open an investigation into the conduct of Secretary Charles Morrison based on the testimonies heard today." The judge adjusted his glasses and prepared to announce his decision. The entire courtroom waited in suspense. "Given the evidence presented and the testimonies collected, I rule to acquit Mrs. Dorothy Wilson of the charges brought against her," declared the judge. "Additionally, I order the municipal government, through its Department of Social Services, to formalize the Hope Village Community Garden project, ensuring its continuity and the necessary technical support." A murmur of approval spread through the room as Michael jumped for joy and ran to hug his grandmother. "As for Sergeant Robert Johnson," the judge continued, "I order the Police Internal Affairs Division to evaluate his conduct, taking into account the exceptional circumstances and the coercion he faced. I further recommend considering the possibility of assigning him as a community liaison officer for the Hope Village area, where he can continue his good work supporting the community." Mrs. Dorothy, with tears in her eyes, hugged her grandson, while receiving congratulations from those present. Sergeant Robert approached timidly. "Mrs. Wilson, I wanted to apologize," he said, visibly emotional. "There's nothing to apologize for, my son," she replied, extending her wrinkled hand to hold his. "You did what you could to protect your little girl. Any mother or father would have done the same." "Thank you," he murmured. "You have no idea how the vegetables from the garden have made a difference in Emily's diet during her treatment, and now we'll be able to keep growing them with the blessing of the law." Mrs. Dorothy smiled. "The garden's doors will always be open to you and your family." Michael tugged at the officer's uniform sleeve. "Uncle Robert, will you bring Emily to play with me in the garden when she gets better?" The officer crouched down, eyes watery, and nodded. "I will, champ. She'll love meeting the brave boy who saved the community garden." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now continuing. 3 weeks had passed since the trial. The news about young Michael and his decisive role in saving the Hope Village Community Garden had spread throughout the town of Fairview. What began as a simple case of alleged trespassing had turned into a municipal corruption scandal that shook the local administration. The Secretary of Public Works, Charles Morrison, was removed from his position as soon as he returned from Washington, D.C. An audit of the department's contracts revealed numerous irregularities, including favoritism toward his brother's construction company and other bids. The case made the front pages of local newspapers, and even a regional TV station sent a crew to cover the story of the community garden and the little witness who brought down a corruption scheme, as the headline proclaimed. For Mrs. Dorothy, however, her biggest concern wasn't the sudden fame but her declining health after the stress of the trial. A persistent cough, which she had ignored for months to save money on doctors, had grown considerably worse. "Grandma, you're coughing a lot," Michael observed as they ate breakfast in their small two-room house adjacent to the garden plot. "Does it hurt?" "It's nothing, dear," she replied, hiding a pained expression as she took a deep breath. "Just a stubborn cold." But it wasn't just a cold. That same afternoon, while instructing some mothers from the community on how to prepare beds for winter planting, Mrs. Dorothy fainted. It was Sergeant Robert, who was off duty and had brought his daughter Emily to see the garden, who helped her and immediately took her to the municipal hospital. The diagnosis was advanced stage pneumonia, worsened by an untreated heart condition. The doctors were clear. Mrs. Dorothy would need to be hospitalized for at least 2 weeks. And my grandson was her first concern, already on the emergency room stretcher. I have no one to look after him. Don't worry about that now, Mrs. Dorothy, reassured Dr. Thomas, the attending physician. Let's focus on getting you better first. Michael, who waited in the lobby under the care of social worker Lucy Martin, the same one who had supported him during the court proceedings, didn't fully grasp the seriousness of the situation. To him, his grandmother just needed medicine and would be home soon. "Aunt Lucy, can I draw a picture to make Grandma happy and help her get better faster?" he asked, his innocence contrasting with the gravity of the moment. "Of course you can, sweetheart," Lucy replied, trying to stay composed. As a social worker, she had witnessed many difficult situations, but the bond and dependence between this elderly grandmother and her orphaned grandson touched her deeply. Sergeant Robert, who had stayed at the hospital to offer support, approached. "Lucy, what's going to happen with the boy?" he asked quietly. "Does Mrs. Dorothy have any other relatives?" "Not that I know of," she answered, checking the case file she had filled out during the legal process. "Michael's parents died in a car accident 4 years ago. There don't seem to be any other close family members." "Will he go to a shelter?" Robert asked, glancing worriedly at the boy, who was focused on his drawing. Lucy sighed. "That's the usual procedure when no extended family is available, but we're only talking about a temporary arrangement until Mrs. Dorothy is discharged." The officer fell silent for a moment, watching little Michael. Without realizing it, this boy had saved his career, and possibly his marriage, which had been strained by the stress of his sick daughter and his erratic work schedule. "My wife and I could take him in," he suddenly suggested. "We have an extra room, and Emily would love the company. They already got along well today in the garden." Lucy looked at him in surprise. That would be an ideal temporary solution, but there are legal procedures, Sergeant. We'd need court approval and— "I can speak to Judge Thomas Wells, the judge overseeing the case," Robert interrupted. "I believe he'll understand the urgency and can issue a temporary custody order." The social worker considered the proposal for a moment. "I'll call the judge right now," she decided. "If we get his preliminary approval, we can formalize everything first thing tomorrow." While the adults worked out the details, Michael finished his drawing, a colorful depiction of the community garden with his grandmother in the center wearing a blue dress, surrounded by several people, including what looked like Sergeant Robert and a small girl who must have been Emily. At the top of the page, in uneven, childlike letters, it read, "For Grandma to get better soon." When Lucy leaned in to see the E drawing, her heart clenched. In the bottom corner, Michael had sketched a small figure, himself holding the hand of a man in a blue uniform. "Who's this, Michael?" she asked gently. "That's Uncle Robert," the boy answered matter-of-factly. "He's going to take me to his house while Grandma gets better." Lucy exchanged a surprised look with the police officer. How did Michael know that when they'd barely discussed the possibility? "You want to go to Sergeant Robert's house?" she asked carefully. "Yes," Michael replied as if it were obvious. "Grandma said if she ever got sick, I should ask Uncle Robert to take me to his place." The two adults glanced at each other again, bewildered. "When did your grandmother say that?" "Michael," Robert asked, crouching down to the boy's level. "After the court day, she said she trusts you to take care of me if she needs help," the boy answered, going back to coloring his drawing as if he hadn't said anything extraordinary. The implications of those words were huge. Mrs. Dorothy somehow had foreseen she might need help, and surprisingly had chosen to entrust her most precious treasure, her grandson, to a man who had initially testified against her in court. Judge Thomas Wells, who had presided over the community garden case, didn't hesitate to grant temporary custody of Michael to Sergeant Robert and his wife, Amanda. After a brief video call with the couple and the boy, he issued an emergency order on the condition that the situation would be reassessed once Mrs. Dorothy was discharged. "I was impressed by the boy's maturity," the judge remarked to Lucy after the call. "The way he understands the situation and trusts Sergeant Robert is remarkable for a 6-year-old. Michael really is special," the social worker agreed. "The upbringing he received from Mrs. Dorothy, despite all their financial struggles, was exemplary. He has a sensitivity and awareness that surprises everyone who meets him. That same evening, Michael was formally introduced to Sergeant Roberts' wife, Amanda Johnson, an elementary school math teacher who was temporarily on leave to care for their daughter during her cancer treatment. The Johnsons' home was modest but welcoming, located in a middle-class neighborhood in Fairview. "Welcome, Michael," Amanda smiled, kneeling to greet the boy. "Emily is so excited to have you here." Emily, an 8-year-old girl with thinning hair, from chemotherapy, appeared in the hallway doorway wearing a colorful headscarf and a bright smile. "Hi, Michael," she exclaimed. "Daddy said you're staying in the guest room. I put some of my books there for you to read." Michael, still clutching his backpack with a few clothes and the drawing he'd made for his grandmother, smiled shyly. "Hi, Emily, thank you." The boy's adjustment to the Johnsons' home was surprisingly smooth. Maybe, as Amanda told her husband, kids who face hardships early develop incredible resilience. Or maybe, as Sergeant Roberts suspected, Michael had found in Emily the older sister he never had, and in the structured routine of the Johnsons' home, a stability that complemented the unconditional, if sometimes chaotic, love of his grandmother. Every morning, Robert took Michael to visit Mrs. Dorothy in the hospital before work. The elderly woman, though still weak, showed signs of improvement and visibly brightened whenever she saw her grandson well cared for and happy. "Are you behaving at Sergeant Roberts' house, my boy?" she would ask, holding his small hand between her wrinkled, now thinner fingers. "Yes, Grandma. Aunt Amanda makes carrot cake just like yours, and Emily taught me how to play checkers," he'd say excitedly. "But I miss our house and the garden." "I'll be home soon, sweetheart," Mrs. Dorothy would promise, though the glance she exchanged with the doctor on round suggested that soon might be a relative concept. At the community garden, Mrs. Dorothy Wilson's absence was felt, but it didn't stop the activities. Inspired by her example and the story that had gained local recognition, more volunteers showed up to help. On Sundays, Robert would take Michael and Emily when she was feeling well enough to visit the garden. The boy, proud, would show everyone how his grandmother had taught him to identify when the tomatoes were ready for harvest, or how to keep pests away without using poison. "Michael has a gift for the land just like his grandma," remarked Mrs. Zelda, a 68-year-old woman who had been coming to the garden since the beginning. "Look how he knows exactly how much to water each plant." It was true. At just 6 years, old Michael displayed a surprising knowledge of gardening, absorbed naturally from years spent by his grandmother's side. "Grandma says every plant is like a person," he explained seriously to Emily, who watched him carefully water a row of lettuce. "Some like more water, some like less, just like people." Emily, who before her illness had rarely shown interest in anything beyond her video games, began eagerly looking forward to Sundays at the garden. Spending time with Michael was changing her perspective. "Dad, when I get better, can we have a little garden in our backyard?" she asked during dinner one week after Michael had arrived. Robert and Amanda exchanged emotional glances. It was the first time in months Emily had spoken about the future with optimism. "Of course we can, sweetheart," Robert replied, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Michael can teach us, right, champ?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. "Grandma always says those who plant harvest twice. The fruits and the joy." The simple wisdom of Mrs. Dorothy, spoken through her grandson, touched everyone who spent time with him. Meanwhile, at the hospital, doctors were battling complications in Mrs. Dorothy's condition. What had initially seemed like just pneumonia turned out to be more complex. Additional tests revealed a chronic heart condition that had been neglected for years, likely due to lack of resources and the elderly woman's tendency to prioritize her grandson's well-being over her own health. "You should have sought treatment a long time ago, Mrs. Dorothy," gently scolded Dr. Charles Newman, the cardiologist overseeing her case. "This kind of condition doesn't appear overnight." "Doctor, when you have a little mouth to feed and no steady income, you learn to ignore the pain," she replied simply. "Every dollar spent on a doctor was one less for Michael's school supplies." The doctor shook his head, moved and frustrated at the same time. How many Mrs. Dorothys were there across America, silently sacrificing their health out of love for their children or grandchildren? "Well, now you'll have to take proper care of yourself," he insisted. Your grandson needs you strong and healthy for many more years." In the third week of her hospitalization, an unexpected complication arose. The owner of the small house where Mrs. Dorothy and Michael lived, upon learning of the elderly woman's hospitalization, decided to take the opportunity to reclaim the property, claiming she needed it for a relative. Without a formal lease and only old receipts as proof of tenancy, the legal situation was precarious. "She can't do that," Amanda protested indignantly when social worker Lucy Martin informed them of the situation. "Mrs. Dorothy is sick. For heaven's sake." "Legally, without a formal contract, it's hard to stop," Lucy explained regretfully. "I tried reasoning with Mrs. Marlene, but she was unmovable. She gave them 1 week to vacate." "What about their things, their personal belongings?" Robert asked, equally outraged. "We need to go there and collect everything important before she changes the locks, like she threatened to do," replied the social worker. "I managed to get a court order to at least ensure that, but we need to act quickly." That same afternoon, Robert took a few hours off work and, along with Amanda and Michael, went to the small house where the boy had lived his entire life with his grandmother. When they saw the place, Amanda couldn't hold back her tears. It was a simple structure with just 1 bedroom, a combined living room, kitchen, and a bathroom, but impeccably clean and organized despite the evident poverty. In every corner there were signs of Mrs. Dorothy's love for her grandson, his drawings carefully taped to the walls, a small shelf with well-worn children's books, and a colorful patchwork blanket she had sewn by hand for him. "Here, Uncle Robert," called Michael, opening a drawer in the only dresser in the room. "Grandma keeps the important things here." The boy pulled out a worn shoebox and opened it, revealing its contents: his birth certificate and those of his deceased parents, some old photos, a simple wedding band that had belonged to his late grandfather, and a school medal Michael had won in kindergarten. "This is my dad and mum," he explained, showing a faded photograph of a young couple smiling with a baby in their arms. "Grandma says they became little stars, but that they watch over me from up there." Amanda swallowed hard, moved by the maturity with which the boy handled loss. "We'll keep everything very safe, Michael," she promised. "When your grandma gets better, you'll find a new and even better place to live." But where would that place be? The question weighed on Robert and Amanda as they gathered the family's belongings. With Mrs. Dorothy's meager pension, it would be nearly impossible to find another rental in the same neighborhood, close to the community garden. That was not only her life's project, but also a source of food for her and her grandson. As they returned home with the boxes containing Mrs. Dorothy and Michael's belongings, an idea began forming in Amanda's mind. Their house had a small annex in the back, originally meant to be a guest house, but which had turned into a storage space for odds and ends after renovations years ago. It was a small area, but with some work it could become a tiny apartment. "Robert, what do you think about turning the annex into a place for Mrs. Dorothy and Michael to stay?" she suggested once the children were asleep. "At least until they find another place." The police officer, who had been worrying about the same problem, looked at his wife with admiration. "You're amazing, you know that?" he said, hugging her. "I was thinking the exact same thing, but I didn't know how to bring it up. With everything going on with Emily, her treatment, I think having Michael around has been really good for our daughter," Amanda replied. "And honestly, this family has become special to us. We can't abandon them now." The next day, Robert presented the idea to Lucy, who enthusiastically approved the temporary solution. Together, they went to the hospital to talk to Mrs. Dorothy. The elderly woman, noticeably weaker after a heart procedure the day before, listened to the proposal with tears in her eyes. "You've already done so much for my grandson. I can't accept this sacrifice," she murmured. "It's no sacrifice at all, Mrs. Dorothy," Amanda assured her, holding her hand. "Our house has enough space, and it would be temporary, just until you recover fully and can find a new home. Besides," Robert added, "Michael and Emily get along so well. It would be good for both of them to stay close. And you'd be near the community garden too." The mention of the garden made the old woman's eyes light up. "How's the garden?" she asked, perking up a bit. "The eggplants must be ready for harvest by now." "Everything's going well," Robert reassured her. "Michael has been a great supervisor, making sure everyone follows his growing instructions to the letter. A faint but genuine smile brightened Mrs. Dorothy Wilson's wrinkled face. "That boy was born with a green thumb," she remarked proudly. "Ever since he was little, any seed he planted would thrive." Mrs. Wilson's recovery was slow but steady. After nearly a month in the hospital, the doctors finally cleared her for discharge, with a long list of recommendations, medications, and follow-up appointments scheduled. Social worker Lucy Martin ensured that with her new enrollment in the Senior Health Assistance Program, Mrs. Wilson would have access to all necessary medications for free. Meanwhile, the story of young Michael and the community garden had taken on unexpected proportions. A regional TV program ran an extensive feature on the case, highlighting how a 6-year-old boy had not only saved his grandmother and the social project, but also helped dismantle a municipal corruption scheme. The mayor of Fairview, pressured by public opinion and fearing the negative impact on his administration, officially announced the creation of the Community Gardens program, with Mrs. Wilson as a special consultant, a paid position albeit modest, once she fully recovered. The former head of Public Works, Charles Morrison, was indicted for administrative misconduct and collusion, along with his brother and other local business owners. The scandal led to the review of several public contracts and the discovery of other irregularities that had drained the city's coffers for years. For Sergeant Robert Johnson, the unfolding events brought an unexpected promotion. He was appointed as coordinator of a new community policing program, with a special focus on socially vulnerable areas like Hope Village. His experience with the community garden and the relationships he built with local residents were considered valuable qualifications for the role. On the day of Mrs. Wilson's hospital discharge, a small crowd waited at the entrance. Residents of Hope Village, garden volunteers, local journalists, and of course Michael, Emily, Robert, and Amanda. The boy could barely contain his excitement when he saw his grandmother coming out in a wheelchair. Standard hospital procedure, though she insisted she could walk. "Grandma!" he shouted, running toward her as soon as he spotted her. Mrs. Wilson opened her arms, her face lighting up with joy as she hugged her grandson. "My prince, look how big you've gotten. It feels like you grew so much these past few weeks. Aunt Amanda makes us eat all our vegetables just like you," Michael told her, "and I've been helping in the garden every Sunday. The cherry tomato plant we planted is already bearing fruit." The elderly woman looked gratefully at Amanda and Robert, who watched the scene with emotional smiles. "I don't have the words to thank you for everything you've done," she said, her voice trembling. "You're the one who taught us a valuable lesson about community and caring for one another," Amanda replied, stepping forward to hug her gently. "And your grandson has brought so much joy to our home, especially to Emily." The girl, who had been shyly hiding behind her mother, stepped forward and handed Mrs. Wilson a simple bouquet of wildflowers. "Welcome back, Mrs. Wilson," she said with a sweet smile. "Michael said you like these flowers because they attract good bees for the garden." "Thank you, dear," the elderly woman smiled, admiring the bouquet. "You're as kind as your father and mother." The annex at the Johnsons' house, hastily renovated with the help of community volunteers, including several of Robert's fellow officers, was ready and waiting for Mrs. Wilson. The space was small but welcoming. A studio room, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom, adapted for easier use by an elderly person in recovery. The belongings salvaged from the old home had been arranged with care, and some new items, a hospital, bed donated by a charity, and a comfortable armchair completed the space. "It's perfect," declared Mrs. Dorothy Wilson upon seeing the place, tears of gratitude streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "More than I could ever have dreamed of." "It's temporary, Mrs. Dorothy," Lucy reminded her, who was also present too. "Assist with the transition. Once you've fully recovered and the city's program is running properly, we can look for a permanent housing solution." "For me, it's already a blessing," the elderly woman replied. "Being close to my grandson, and the garden is all I needed to recover fully." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The following days established a new routine for the two families, now sharing the same property. In the morning, Amanda would take Michael and Emily to school, the girl had returned to attending classes part-time as her energy allowed. During the day, Mrs. Dorothy rested, did her cardiac rehabilitation exercises, and when she felt up to it, offered impromptu gardening lessons to interested neighbors right from the small garden Robert had prepared in front of her annex. In the afternoon, when the children returned from school, it was time for homework at the porch table under Mrs. Dorothy's watchful eye. Despite her limited formal education, she insisted on the importance of studies. "The most valuable thing you can have in life is knowledge," she would say, repeating what she used to tell her son, Michael's father, who had been the first in the family to finish high school. On Sundays, the whole extended family would go to the Hope Village Community Garden. The project had grown significantly. The adjacent lot, also owned by the city, had been incorporated, doubling the cultivation area. A small brick building was being erected to serve as an administrative office and educational space. An official plaque at the entrance designated the site as the Model Urban Agriculture Project and listed Mrs. Dorothy Wilson as founder and technical consultant. "Who would have thought, Mrs. Dorothy?" Mrs. Zelda remarked, as the two women supervised the preparation of new garden beds. "From nearly being arrested to a city employee, life sure takes turns." "It's true, my dear," Mrs. Dorothy laughed. "But what really makes me happy is seeing how the project has grown. Now we're not just a garden, we're an environmental education center. Even schools are bringing children here to learn about urban farming." Indeed, the Municipal Department of Education had included regular visits to the community garden in the curriculum of local public schools. What had started as a desperate effort by a grandmother to feed her grandson and help needy neighbors was becoming a model of sustainability and education. For Michael, the changes had been profound but positive. Though he missed having his grandmother all to himself, like in the days of their simple little house, he loved the new extended family he had gained. Emily had become the sister he never had, Robert a male role model he admired, and Amanda a second mother who helped with homework and told him bedtime stories on days when Mrs. Dorothy was too tired. At school, his status had changed dramatically. From a quiet and somewhat isolated boy, the son of deceased parents raised by a poor grandmother, as some mean classmates described her, he had become a local celebrity after the TV report. His classmates now surrounded him curiously, wanting to know details about the day in court and what it was like to have taken down a big bad guy, as the story had been simplified in their childish imaginations. Michael, however, kept his feet on the ground. "I just told the truth," he answered simply when asked about his heroic act. This early maturity impressed his teachers, who noticed in him an unusual ability to articulate and empathize. "This boy has a bright future," Ms. Debbie commented to Amanda during a parent-teacher meeting. "His vocabulary and reasoning are well above average for his age. Have you thought about applying for a scholarship at a school with more resources?" Amanda promised to consider the suggestion, though she knew such a decision would need to be carefully discussed with Mrs. Dorothy Wilson, whose pride sometimes kept her from accepting help that might seem like charity. Meanwhile, in Emily's life, an equally significant transformation was taking place. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about her response to leukemia treatment. Her tests showed a consistent reduction in cancer cells, and her energy had visibly improved. "I can't say for certain, of course," remarked Dr. Henry, the pediatric oncologist, during a checkup, "but I've noticed that patients with strong psychological support and a positive family environment often respond better to treatment." Michael's arrival seems to have been very beneficial for Emily. It was true. The friendship between the children had blossomed surprisingly well, despite their age difference and Emily's health condition. Michael treated his friend's illness with disarming naturalness, without the discomfort or pity the girl often sensed from adults and other children. To him, her lack of hair was just a detail, and the days she was too weak to play were simply rest days to gather energy. This attitude had been crucial in improving Emily's self-image. She had once been a vain little girl, but now struggled to accept the changes in her appearance. "You know, Michael," she said one afternoon as they drew on the porch, "before I got sick, I thought being pretty was the most important thing. Now I know it's not." "What is important then?" he asked, focused on his drawing of a giant tree. Being kind to people, helping those in need, like your grandma does, she replied, thoughtfully. When I grow up, I want to be a doctor and help sick kids like me. Michael smiled, nodding seriously, as if he had just heard the most sensible decision in the world. One afternoon, about 3 months after Mrs. Dorothy's hospital discharge, Robert came home earlier than usual with an unreadable expression. He carried an official envelope in his hands. "What's wrong?" Amanda asked worriedly when she saw him walk in. "I got the official notice about the conclusion of the investigation against former Secretary Charles Morrison," he explained, sitting at the kitchen table. "He's been indicted for multiple crimes, including cartel formation, bid rigging, and threatening a public official." "That's good, isn't it?" Amanda questioned, sitting beside him. "Yes and no," Robert replied with a sigh. "On one hand, justice is being served. On the other, he was released on bail, and according to some colleagues, he's been making veiled threats against everyone involved in the case, especially against me and—" He hesitated. "Against Mrs. Dorothy and Michael?" Amanda finished, paling. Robert nodded gravely. "They're probably just empty words from a desperate man trying to intimidate witnesses, but even so, I think we need to stay alert." That same night, after the children were asleep, Robert and Amanda talked to Mrs. Dorothy Wilson about the situation. The elderly woman listened with surprising calm. "My dear, at this stage in life, I've faced worse things than a corrupt politician," she said with the serene wisdom of someone who's lived a long life. "I won't let threats ruin the joy we're experiencing now." "Even so, we'll take some precautions," Robert insisted. "I've already spoken to the battalion commander, and we'll have a patrol car making extra rounds on this street and near the community garden. And for now, it'd be best if Michael doesn't walk alone." Mrs. Dorothy agreed to the measures, more to reassure the couple than out of real concern. In her view, men like Charles Morrison were cowards who hid behind titles and influence, but rarely had the courage to act directly. The following days passed uneventfully, with no sign of the former secretary or his lackeys. The extended family's routine continued. School for the children, work for Robert and Amanda, healthcare for Mrs. Dorothy and Emily, and the comforting Sundays at the community garden. It was on a Sunday that a disturbing incident occurred. The Hope Village Community Garden was especially busy that day, as they were celebrating the first harvest from the new plots. Residents, volunteers, and even city officials were present. A small makeshift stage had been set up for the official inauguration of the administrative office. Michael was helping distribute basil seedlings to visitors when he noticed a strange man taking intense photos of the area. It wouldn't have been unusual given the media coverage the project had been receiving, but something about the man's behavior caught the boy's attention. He wasn't photographing the plants or the activities, just the people, especially Mrs. Dorothy, Robert, and his family. With the sharp intuition he'd shown before, Michael approached Sergeant Robert Johnson and tugged on his sleeve. "Uncle Robert, there's a weird man taking pictures of us," he whispered, subtly pointing. The officer, already on alert due to the threats, immediately spotted the man Michael described. There was indeed something suspicious about his demeanor. Asking Amanda to stay with the children, Robert approached the man. "Good morning," he greeted, identifying himself as an officer. "You seem interested in our project. Are you a journalist?" The man, visibly uncomfortable with the approach, muttered something about just being curious and quickly headed toward the exit. Robert, however, had noticed a revealing detail. The man wore a watch identical to the one he'd often seen on former Secretary Charles Morrison's wrist, an expensive, distinctive model he flaunted as a status symbol. "I think he was connected to Morrison," Robert told Amanda later when they were home. "Probably sent to intimidate or monitor our activities." "That's terrifying, Robert," she replied, worried. "Maybe we should consider more serious protection. Measures. Already taken care of. Tomorrow I'll install security cameras here at home and in Mrs. Dorothy's annex. And I've spoken to some trusted colleagues who'll take turns doing extra patrols in plain clothes." That night, however, brought an even bigger scare. Around 2 in the morning, the sound of breaking glass woke the family. Robert, with reflexes honed by years on the force, immediately got up and carefully checked the source of the noise. A rock had been thrown through the living room window, with a piece of paper tied to it, carrying a threatening message. Loose lips sink ships, kids too. Despite efforts to keep the situation under control, the midnight incident changed everything. The police were called, a report was filed, and the rock with the message was collected as evidence. But the psychological damage was already done, especially when Michael, awakened by the commotion, read the message before they could hide it. "Do they want to hurt us because of the bad man from the court?" he asked, his big eyes wide with fear. Amanda hugged him tightly. "No, sweetheart. No one's going to hurt you. Uncle Robert is a policeman, remember? He'll protect us." But her reassuring words couldn't completely erase the fear. For the first time since they'd known Michael, they saw the boy truly shaken, asking to sleep in his grandmother's room that night. The next morning, an emergency family meeting was called. Present were Robert, Amanda, Mrs. Dorothy Wilson, and also Lucy, the social worker, who had been called in to advise on the situation. "The threats need to be taken seriously," Robert stated, naturally taking the lead due to his police experience. "I believe Charles Morrison is behind this, trying to intimidate us before the trial, where I'll be one of the key witnesses against him." "We can't let him win through fear," protested Mrs. Dorothy, her face showing more anger than fear. "If we back down now, he gets exactly what he wants." "I agree, Mrs. Dorothy," Robert replied, "but we need to be cautious, especially with the children involved." It was Lucy who suggested a temporary solution. "There's a state witness protection program that could be activated in this case. You could be relocated temporarily to another city, with all expenses covered, until the trial is over." The idea of leaving Fairview, the community garden, and everything they had built over the past months hit the family like a bombshell. Emily, who had entered the kitchen just in time to hear the proposal, began crying silently. "I don't want to leave," she sobbed. "My friends are finally talking to me again now that my hair is growing back, and the doctor said I'm getting better." Amanda hugged her daughter, looking helplessly at her husband. The situation seemed to have no easy solution. Staying meant risking everyone's safety. Leaving meant abandoning the life they had worked so hard to rebuild. It was Michael, ever surprising with his childlike wisdom, who offered a different perspective. "Grandma always says big problems need lots of hands to solve," he remarked, sitting on Mrs. Dorothy's lap. "Why don't we ask the people from the garden for help? Everyone there likes us." The adults exchanged thoughtful glances. The boy was right. Over the months, they had built a support network in the community. Maybe the solution wasn't to run, but to strengthen that network. "Michael's right," Robert agreed, an idea forming. "Charles Morrison has power and money, but we have something he doesn't. An entire community on our side." Inspired by Michael's suggestion, an alternative plan began to take shape. Instead of leaving, they would face the situation as a united community. Robert called an emergency meeting at the community garden for that same afternoon. The community's response was overwhelming. Dozens of Hope Village residents, garden volunteers, friends, and even strangers, moved by their story in the media, showed up to offer support. A community surveillance system was organized. Residents would take turns watching for suspicious activity in the neighborhood. Local business owners agreed to install additional street-facing cameras. School bus drivers committed to enhancing safety during children's routes. "We won't let a corrupt man destroy what we've built together," declared Mrs. Zelda, her voice trembling with emotion but firm with determination. "This garden has fed the children and grandchildren of half the families here today. It's time we give back." The community mobilization exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. Within days, news of the threats against the Garden family, as they had become known, spread through the city and reached the regional press. A major newspaper ran a full-page story on the case, highlighting how a powerful, corrupt man was trying to intimidate an elderly woman, an honest police officer, and 2 children, one of them undergoing cancer treatment. The public exposure of the case ended up being the family's greatest protection. With the media spotlight on them, any action against Mrs. Dorothy, Michael, or the Johnsons would immediately be linked to Charles Morrison, further damaging his already precarious legal situation. Realizing the shift in dynamics, the The former official backed down. The threat stopped abruptly, and behind-the-scenes reports suggested his own lawyers had advised him to distance himself completely from the case, lest he worsen his legal standing. Life slowly began returning to normal. The security cameras remained, along with some precautionary measures, but the constant fear faded. Michael started sleeping in his own room in the annex with his grandmother again. Emily enthusiastically resumed her school activities, and Mrs. Dorothy continued her recovery, now with renewed energy to oversee the expansion of the community. 6 months after the rock-through-the-window incident, major news arrived. Charles Morrison had accepted a plea deal with the district attorney, confessing to his crimes in exchange for a reduced sentence. As part of the agreement, he handed over incriminating documents implicating other politicians and businessmen in a much larger municipal corruption scheme. "It's the end of an era of corruption in Fairview," remarked Robert, reading the news over breakfast. And it all started with a little boy pointing his finger at a police officer in court. Michael, eating cereal while listening to the adults, looked confused. "I just told the truth, Uncle Robert. Grandma always says the truth is the shortest path, even when it seems the hardest." Mrs. Dorothy, now almost fully recovered and back to many of her activities, smiled hearing her grandson repeat her teachings. "That's right, my boy, and look where the truth has brought us." Indeed, the journey since that fateful day in court had been extraordinary. The small community garden, started on an abandoned lot, was now a model project, replicated in other neighborhoods across the city. Mrs. Dorothy, the squatter who had nearly been arrested, was now an official urban agriculture consultant for the city, receiving a modest but steady salary that, combined with her pension, provided a dignified life for her and her grandson. The annex at the Johnsons' house, originally a temporary solution, had become permanent after an honest conversation between the families. "You've become part of our family," Amanda explained when the topic of finding another home came up. "Emily needs Michael close by, and we love having you here. If you're comfortable, we'd like you to stay." For Mrs. Dorothy, whose greatest concern had always been securing stability for her grandson, the offer felt like a blessing. Michael would have a safe home, an extended family that loved him, and would remain close to his grandmother for as long as she was still in this world, a concern that, though unspoken, was always present in his thoughts. For Robert and Amanda, the arrangement also brought clear advantages. Mrs. Dorothy Wilson's presence provided extra security for Emily on days when both had to work. The friendship between the children continued to greatly benefit the girls' recovery, and there was something deeply comforting about having a wise matriarchal figure like Mrs. Dorothy nearby, especially for Amanda, who had lost her own mother at a young age. A full year had passed since the day in court. It was a Sunday morning, and the two families, now inseparably united, were preparing to celebrate the first official anniversary of the Hope Village Community Garden. A special ceremony was planned, attended by the new mayor. The previous one had resigned after the corruption scandal, state officials, and even a national TV crew covering the project. Michael, now 7, was helping his grandmother choose which vegetables would be displayed at the main stand. His small hands handled the lettuce, tomatoes, and eggplants with surprising care. "Grandma, do you think my dad and Mum would be proud of us?" he suddenly asked, looking up at her. Mrs. Dorothy felt a lump in her throat. Even after 4 years since her son and daughter-in-law's passing, the pain was still there, softened by time, but never completely gone. "I'm absolutely sure, my love," she replied, stroking his brown hair. "They'd be very, very proud of the brave and honest boy you've become." Michael smiled, satisfied with the answer, and turned his attention back to selecting the best produce from the garden. Sometimes, in moments like these, Mrs. Dorothy allowed herself to imagine what it would be like if her son and daughter-in-law were still alive. Would they have approved of the choices she made? Would they have understood her decisions? Would they have been proud to see how she had raised Michael despite all the hardships? As she watched her grandson work with the focus and dedication that always defined him, Mrs. Dorothy felt a deep certainty. Yes, they would have understood, because in the end, everything she had done, the garden, the legal battle, even accepting the Johnson family's help, had been driven by the same unconditional love his parents had felt for him. The celebration ceremony was an absolute success. The Hope Village Community Garden, now officially registered as an NGO, non-governmental organization, received the title of Model Project for Sustainability and Social Inclusion. The new mayor, eager to associate himself with the successful initiative, announced the program's expansion to 5 other neighborhoods in the city. Michael, to his complete surprise, was called onto the makeshift stage to receive a commemorative plaque as Young Citizen of the Year. The boy, wearing a green shirt similar to the one he'd worn in court, now a bigger size, stepped up shyly. "I didn't do anything special," he whispered to his grandmother, who stood beside him with overflowing pride. "You did everything, my boy," she replied. "You taught us that even little people can make a big difference when they have the courage to speak the truth." Standing on the stage, holding the plaque almost bigger than his small arms, Michael looked out at the gathered crowd. He saw Mrs. Dorothy, her wrinkled face lit by the most beautiful smile. He saw Robert, Amanda, and Emily, now with short hair but growing back, cheering enthusiastically. He saw the neighbors from Hope Village, the garden volunteers, social worker, Lucy, and so many other faces that had become part of his expanded life. At that moment, a simple yet profound thought crossed the boy's mind. All these people were now his family, not just by blood like his grandmother, but through bonds of love, respect, and solidarity. Bonds that began forming the day he, driven by the simple desire to defend his grandmother, pointed at a police officer in court and told the truth. The end of the story. Dear listener, join us on this emotional journey by sharing your thoughts. In the comments, what touched your heart the most in Michael and Mrs. Dorothy's story? Leave your like, subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories, and tell us where you're watching from. Your company is our greatest gift.